Hello, everyone. So we are not exactly going to France because I'll speak about Saudi Arabia today. So just I'm part of EDF. I'm part of the consulting department. So we work for external stakeholder and we provide some economic analysis on various topics. And what I'll present today, it's a paper that we've done in common with the CAPSART Institute, which is which is an institute in Saudi Arabia, which is dealing with energy topic. And so this paper will be published next week online on CAPSART website. And I'll give you the insight of what are our main conclusions. And just to give you an overview, the point of the paper was to see how we could develop trading between Saudi Arabia and the neighbor country, and see if we could do some accurate economic analysis using PLEXOS to support this trading development. So the first challenge was to build the PLEXOS study and to have a good data for the region, because it sometimes can be challenging for some of the country. But our idea was to ensure that we based our study on public data. So on the paper, all data are sources, and you could see from which institute it comes from to ensure that everyone is able to replicate the conclusion of the study. What really matters for us was to have a scope including Saudi Arabia, of course, but also to have 8 of the neighbor countries, which means that we had the GCC countries, GCCIA countries included on the scope of the study, but also Egypt, for example. So in total, we have 8 countries: Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Oman included on the scope, which make 9 countries in total. So we could see every opportunity of trading between those countries. That was the main idea. Of course, we included the official political target of Saudi Arabia onto the scope. There has been, in the last scope, a new NDCs from Saudi Arabia on the vision that the kingdom has given to this event have been included on the scope of the study. And we tried to describe as accurate as we could the various assets, generation asset and the interconnection asset. And we also tried to have an accurate vision of demand to capture the opportunity of making trade at the maximum. I'll detail that after. So for the thermal asset, we picked up the industrial pipeline. We looked at all the assets which are already existing, of course, but we also looked at all the projects which are ongoing to see which one will be still live, will be live in 2030. We exclude the decommissioned one, of course, and we aggregate the asset by technology type, the oil asset and the gas asset, nuclear and renewable, of course. We obtained an installed capacity for each country, and we compared it to the level of capacity requirement on each of these countries to decommission part of the asset and to ensure that there is no a situation where we have a portfolio which is overcapacitated. For renewable, we were a bit concerned because it was really important to have an hourly granularity, because if you want to model and capture all the potential value, you want to have an hourly granularity for generation and for renewable. And there is no so much project on the region at the moment. But what we did was to look at all the portfolio of the project, even those who are not live yet. And we looked at the different locations of where they are located. And we assume that the development of renewable of this project were located where the projects are the most represented. So for example, Saudi Arabia has a strong development on solar in their political target that they just set up. And we've located, we suppose that the future solar development will be located on where the current identified projects are located. We used an external data sources, which is Renewable Ninja, where you could, with a GPS location, obtain a vision of what a solar plant or a wind plant would produce in this location. So we based it on that. For the political vision of Saudi Arabia, just want to mention on this slide that the ambition is quite significant. For the moment, on the portfolio, there is a lot of gas assets. There is also oil assets, which are representing half of the total installed capacity. And they consider for 2030 that there will be an oil phase-out, which is quite a big step. And they also consider development of solar, 90 gigawatts, and development of wind, 30 gigawatts. So this ambition has been included on the description of our scenario. We also include a vision of the operating reserve. So because we manipulate aggregated assets, it would not make sense to include into PLEXOS for each of the assets the operating reserve, and after let the model used it as if it was a proper unit, because it's an aggregated asset. So what we did was to take the operating reserve and add it to the installed capacity requirement to ensure that there is enough installed capacity on the system to provide the operating reserve which is required for the system to work properly. And there is a value of operating reserve which was not that easy to obtain. So we based our analysis on a SIGRE publication, where all GCC/IA countries have provided their spinning reserve. And for the other country, where the data were not available, we've used the largest unit identified on the country, considering that it's generally how the spinning reserve is set in most of the country. The interconnection. So the purpose of the analysis was to see if Saudi Arabia could trade with other countries. So why they have that behind when they wanted us to work with them? It's because they are developing the interconnection between Saudi Arabia and Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. In red, it's a new interconnection expected in 2030. So what they wanted to see is what they wanted to see is to ensure that they will be able to capture the value from this interconnection. So there is in Saudi Arabia between Egypt, there is 3 gigawatts coming live before 2030. The assumptions for demand. So we based the power demand from we did something which is very common in our work is to base the power demand with an extrapolation based on the current demand and after consider a growth. The growth we assume was the average of the historical growth on GDP, and we consider it to be the same pace until 2030. So about COVID, we didn't include COVID on the assessment for the average growth, but we started from the power of demand, the most richest sun that we had. So this means that we are not considering, but it's only 2030, a huge change of the portfolio of the customer due to probably energy transition. So for the moment, we consider, and I think it's something which makes sense, we are only looking at 6 years ahead. We are not considering the customer to change a lot their habits. So no electric vehicle, for example. For the losses, we took the average of the past losses for all countries. We had some data missing on Iraq, so we did the average. It's quite significant, so it's why I mentioned it. The losses could be quite high in some countries, and we included them, especially in Saudi Arabia. So for the pattern, it was really important for us to have a daily pattern. We had the hourly description for the load for the renewable, but we also wanted to have the hourly pattern for demand. So we based all our pattern of the region on a study which is published by Harvard, which is called the Harvard Dataverse study, if I remember well. So it's a study where there is some pattern in all countries over the world. Most of the time, it's historical pattern which are incorporated, but it's quite difficult to have historical pattern at hourly granularity on the region, so we based our pattern on that. For the generation mix that we obtained in 2030, what's important to observe is that renewable in our study is quite significant, especially in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia, and it's a bit lower on the other country. So just to have in mind what's assumed on the study is to say that Saudi Arabia has its political target, which is a huge development, all phase out, huge development in renewable, and the other countries are more or less based on the project-based forecast, and so it makes quite a discrepancy. So the PLEXOS setting that we've used to model the market, if you can call it market on the region, for the PLEXOS setting, we consider an hourly granularity, 1 year horizon. We simulated 2030, which is what's mentioned on the paper. We also simulated 2023, but it's not included on the paper, but more for us to ensure everything was okay. And for the generation asset granularity, we aggregate all the assets by technology type. So it means that we have 3 types of assets for oil and 3 types for gas, plus solar, plus wind, plus hydro. So on each of the thermal assets, it's steam turbine, combined cycle, and gas turbine. For the parameter about randomness and optimization, we have a full deterministic approach. It's 1 time series because data are sometimes difficult to find on the different countries. So there was some country where there was only 1 time series available. The study could be run as short-term and as long-term. What's on the paper, it's only the short-term case because we can address the point with only a short-term analysis, but we did also some expansion one that shown, for example, that a solar development could be sometime economic with some assumptions. And for the description of the network, we have 12 nodes. So it means that on the 9 countries, there is 3 extra nodes, and they are all in Saudi Arabia, because the network in Saudi Arabia is very specific. And when there is interconnection, the interconnection are mentioned with 1 specific node of Saudi Arabia to the other country. So it was really important to keep these 4 nodes to not overestimate the capacity of the country with the neighbor on the east. And it's an aggregation of the 50 and 60 Hertz network. So the main conclusions, what we've done all that, we've been able to run PLEXOS. So the main conclusion with these assumptions is that Saudi Arabia is exporting So the net export in terawatt-hour is positive from Saudi Arabia to all the other countries. On the graph on the right, you see the number in percentage, the number of hours where Saudi Arabia is exporting. So what kept our attention was the border Egypt-Saudi Arabia, because the net export is positive, but the number of hours when it's exporting is only 30%. So it means that there is a distribution of export that was interesting to analyze. And for the other country, it's mainly a strong export. So what we did, what we wanted to see if it's how we can capture the value of for the system as a whole, so meaning with the neighbor country, how we could capture value, but easily. Because we are used to, in the European market, to have an hourly market very well developed. So if there is extra value, it means that there is export at hourly level, and you capture all the added value that you can. Here we are speaking on country where it's more integrated system. The hourly market is not well defined everywhere, especially in Saudi Arabia. And so for the interconnection, it will be difficult to see day by day which transaction should be the best. So the idea was to see if we could use PLEXOS to model a perfect liberalized market, an hourly market, perfect, and using this modeling, capture what kind of trade, so what kind of long-term contract could be built to capture the value. So we build 4 types of contract. Some monthly average contract, some weekly average contract. So it means that we took at the perfect market transaction and we average them by month or by week. And we took 2 other types of contract where the idea was to capture the shape of the day. And so we add 4 types of days or 12 types of days on the second case, and we replicate that in all the quarter and in all the months. And the idea is that the transaction on these 4 scenarios that we model in PLEXOS are fixed, and they are not decision variable. We consider that there is a long-term contract between the 2 countries. PLEXOS is taking that as an input, and we see what it does in terms of dispatch on the different countries. So here is the main conclusion of the analysis that we've performed. So on the right, you can appreciate, so on the border, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, how much of the maximum value the long-term contract capture. So on the far left, you have the situation where there is no trade at all between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. So we capture no value from the interconnection. On the right, the PLEXOS is simulating a case where we have a perfect hourly market, very theoretical, and we capture 100% of the added value. And in between the 4 scenarios I just explained, so we included this long-term contract onto PLEXOS, and we saw in terms of overall cost, how much value it captures, and it moves the cost from the case with no trade to the case with a perfect trade. And the main conclusion is what really matters more than the seasonal shape, it's the daily shape, because that's the 2 cases where we have a daily profile where we capture half of the value. So it's the main conclusion of the analysis. And it's what we will publish. And the next step that we wanted to have on this analysis with them will be to see if we could include in the modeling some more assets and go to a further horizon. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions? We've got a couple questions.
Hi, a quick one. With regards to reserve, did you just assume they're part of the total supply and they will just generate, or did you have them running as reserves whenever they're needed and they were part of, use the reserve function of PLEXOS?
If I just assume what?
The operating reserves that you had.
Yeah, the operating reserve, what we did. So, in fact, our first idea was to include it on the modeling on PLEXOS if we had a granularity at a unit level, because it would have made sense, because the PLEXOS optimization would have been to choose which unit is doing the operating reserve. But because if you look at the number of units in the region, sometimes for some countries there is more than 500 different units, which give various characteristics. So what we did was to aggregate them and to technology type. And so the operating reserve, it was not really relevant to include it on the description of each unit because we did this aggregation by technology type. So what we did was to ensure that on the installed capacity requirement, there is enough to reach the level of residual peak demand plus the operating reserve to ensure that the system is manageable.
So the system just ran, so the reserve just ran in the generation mix as every other unit rather than being called as a reserve? Yeah,
in fact, we don't model the operating reserve within the PLEXOS study, but we ensure that the total installed capacity is there.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation. My question is that I understand you actually model all the neighboring countries around Saudi Arabia, but still it seems the main focus is Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi is the main exporter. But then the question is that all the other neighboring countries accept that because they want to have also self-sufficiency and security of supply for themselves. So how do you tackle this consideration into your work?
Yeah, so what I would say is that the conclusion also depends on the story you are considering. And here it's clearly a situation where Saudi Arabia is taking a lead in terms of renewable. In case you have more development of zero variable cost on the other country, the conclusion could be different, of course. That's clear.
Hi, I'm curious about the interconnectors. So mainly it is interconnecting between two countries. So the first question I have is, I saw that the flow goes from Arabia Saudi to Egypt and then from Egypt to the other country. So that means at the end you are like recirculating, which is in reality.
It was annual average, not the picture on 1 hour. So it was the annual average. So
yes, but what I mean is, do you have any constraint for the interconnectors so that this doesn't happen many times, because at the end the cost.
So what we did was to add a toll fee on each of the interconnector, which was, if I remember well, $1 per megawatt hour, just to ensure that you don't have cycling power on your system. And PLEXOS should minimize, so it's not a real cost tolling fee, but it's just to ensure PLEXOS is not cycling the power.
And the last question is regarding the limits of the interconnectors, because given the interconnectors are very long, so the risk of disconnecting one could cause instability for the network, for example, for the other country.
Yeah.
So mainly in this case, countries tend to constrain and limit the interconnectors. In your case, did you have to put a constraint for the flow?
So we didn't put constraint for the flow, but what we did was to set the install capacity country by country. without assuming any import for all the other countries to ensure there is a sovereignty on each of the country. And also we did the same for the calculation of the operating reserve, except in GCCIA, because they've already mentioned some cooperation. So we use the figure they have shown on SIGRE conference.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.